20-year-old Heather Elvis went on a date, a first date actually, on the night she disappeared, but calls to and from her phone went on for multiple hours after this date ended. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please do subscribe, and if you're old here, hello again. My name is Kate Philpott and I cover true crime and missing person cases on my channel. In today's video, we'll be looking into a case that seems like it should be an absolute slam dunk, but that there are still no answers for, and that is the case of Heather Elvis. By the way, thank you Nora for requesting this case. Heather Elvis was born on the 30th of June 1993, and she would have been 28 now. She grew up in the tourist destination of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Heather was absolutely stunning. She worked in a bar called the Tilted Kilt, which was kind of like a Scottish style Hooters. The uniform was quite revealing, but at 20 years old, it was a bit of a middle finger to the parents, just saying, hey look, I'm old enough to do what I want now. I certainly went through a phase like that. Once I turned 18, I know I was an absolute nightmare for my parents, but I basically just decided, you know what, I'm an adult now, I can do what I want, I can have as much freedom as I want. That didn't go down well. And although Heather was working in this bar, it was her dream to start working in makeup. She was really good at it, and she was actually studying cosmetology to indulge in this passion. She really knew no boundaries when it came to dreaming big. In order to understand anything about this case, it is crucial to understand Heather's love life. The night Heather went missing, she was on a date with a guy called Stephen Schiraldi. And I have questions about this guy. Did she meet him on a dating app? Did she meet him in person? Did she know him for long? Did she know anybody else he knew? Did they have mutual friends? But most importantly, can we trust him? Because at the end of the day, he was the last person to see her, so that's generally a pretty big red flag. But before we get fully carried away with ourselves and believes that he's guilty of something horrific, there's a lot more you need to know about Heather's love life. In June 2013, this would have been about 6 months before her disappearance, she developed quite an intense crush. And the crush was on a repairman in her work called Sidney. She actually tweeted a lot about her inner desires, things like this. And then there were also other tweets like this. And everyone Heather worked with knew well that she liked this guy, and after not too long, they knew well that they had actually started seeing each other. But there are some things you should probably know about Sidney. First of all, he was 17 years older than her. He was 37 years old. Not to mention he was married, 15 years married actually, and he had 3 kids aged 10, 13, and 15. Whew. But that didn't stop him from coming to visit her at work, bringing her coffee and bagels, and just being less than subtle. And look, they seemed to become pretty close. In fact, Brianna, Heather's roommate, would later go on to say that Heather was actually in love with Sidney. But because this was an affair, there were people who really felt that this relationship was just totally inappropriate, and some of these people actually worked with Heather. So one day, 2 girls that Heather worked with made a prank call to the Tilted Kilt, posing as Tammy, Sidney's wife, and basically said, listen Heather, I know about you and you better stop this right now. So obviously this would be pretty terrifying if you were actually having an affair. So Heather and Sidney did actually cool off for a bit. But then the real Tammy actually found out, and I simply do not have words to describe this woman. Let me just tell you how she reacted. First of all, and this is fair enough, she made Sidney call Heather and end the affair, but Sidney also went on this phone call to say that Heather was just some girl who spread her legs, and that she meant absolutely nothing to him, and he was really, really horrible about it. But following this, Tammy actually went on to send inappropriate texts to Heather. And when I say inappropriate, I mean there were pictures of her and Sidney together, if you're picking up what I'm putting down. From there, the texts got quite threatening, and this would have been in late October. So Tammy was sending texts to Heather such as, hey sweetie, ready to meet the missus? She also sent one that said, someone's about to get their ass beat down. Another one said, "You can tell me who you are right now or I will find out another way." And then there was another one that said, "Your is about to take his last breath." So, okay, maybe Heather was in the wrong to be with a married man, but this still must have been absolutely terrifying for her. But she texted Tammy back in a few days and said that she was nobody she needed to worry about any longer. Although with that said, those who knew her definitely noticed a shift in her demeanor, and they noticed that Heather became very paranoid at this point. But there is more stuff Tammy did, though. I have really only scratched the bleeding surface. She handcuffed Sidney to their bed every single night to ensure that he would remain faithful to her. She changed the password on his phone to something only she knew, so that he would literally have to ask permission to use his own phone. She went everywhere with him when he left the house. And Tammy also made Sidney get a tattoo of her name above his shlabonga one. And as he was getting this Tammy tattoo, she looked at him and she said, "Too bad. If you hadn't done that thing with that girl, this wouldn't be happening right now." Man, like, it seems more toxic than it's worth at this point. But hey, I've never been married, I don't know what it's like. And at some point, Sidney told Heather that Tammy didn't disapprove of the affair itself, but more so she disapproved of the fact that he lied about it. And the reason for that was because she also had taken a lover and had had one for like years. Regardless, on the 5th of November 2013 then, this was the last day that Sidney and Heather saw each other. And since early November, there was no contact between Sidney and Heather, at least by phone. Except of course for one night, and I'll let you guess what night that was. 2 weeks later, the Moore family went on a family trip to California, and they actually drove there in their new black Ford F-150. So that's a big drive. They drove all the way from South Carolina to California, and they returned on the 11th of December, which is a week before Heather went missing. But when they came back, Heather was moving on with her life. She wasn't trying to worry about any married man. She was getting her stuff together. She got a new job at a salon that she was really excited about starting just before Christmas. She started to regularly attend church with Brie, and she was generally in a good place. Although there was one other thing that was changing about Heather, and that was the fact that she had put on weight. Now, I'm not here to shame. We're all human beings, we fluctuate in weight. But her boss from the Tilted Kilt noted that Heather had gone from an A cup to a B cup, and then from a B cup to a C cup, all in a relatively short period of time. And that's something that's often associated with one's first trimester in pregnancy. Now, could she have been gaining weight due to the stress that she had been put under by this terrifying woman, Tammy, and the stress of like having an affair and not wanting to be found out and all of that? Yeah, I mean, she could have been comfort eating. She could have literally been holding on to more fat in her body because her cortisol levels were high. Or, on the other hand, maybe she was pregnant, and if so, it could have easily been Sidney's baby. And Heather was worried about this, to the point where she did actually go and take a pregnancy test. But this test came back as error. So still no answers there. Obviously, if she was pregnant, neither Sidney nor Tammy would be very happy about that, I'm sure. Alright, let's get into the night of her disappearance. On the 17th of December 2013, Heather went on that first date with Stephen Giraldi. He picked her up at 10 p.m. They drove around and looked at people's Christmas lights. This was literally a week before Christmas. And then they drove to a shopping centre car park, and he taught her how to drive a manual transmission vehicle. Heather even sent photos of herself driving this manual transmission car to her father, Terry, and to her roommate, Brie. Stephen then dropped her off at her apartment at about 1:15 a.m. And that was the last time she was ever seen in person, that we know of. Now, 20 minutes after Stephen dropped her home, Heather received a phone call. And it was from a number that she hadn't saved. It was actually from a payphone. And this call lasted 5 minutes. Soon after this, Heather called Brie, who was actually out of town for the holidays. Heather was hysterically crying. She was very upset, but moved because apparently Sidney had called her saying that he was leaving his wife and that he wanted to meet up with her. Obviously, Brianna was like, Don't go, don't meet him, you're in such a good place, just sleep on it, we'll talk about it tomorrow. Heather and Bree's call lasted just 2 minutes, and that was the last time Heather was heard from. So on the 19th of December, 2 days later, Heather's car was found. She had this green Dodge Intrepid, and it was parked sideways at this place called Peachtree Landing, which was a boat landing about 8 miles from her apartment, and only 4 miles from the Moorer residence, by the way. And on that same day, officers went up to the Elvis household and they asked her dad, "Are you missing a car?" And he said, "No." And they said, "A green Dodge Intrepid?" And he said, "That's Heather's car." So they went to go look at it, and the car was locked, and Heather's phone, keys, and purse were not inside. There were also no signs of a struggle or anything like that. Terry actually just thought that maybe someone had stolen the car for some reason and just abandoned it there. So because of that, nobody was all too worried about it, and Terry actually got in the car and drove it home. Obviously at this point, nobody was really suspecting that the car could actually be a crime scene maybe. So searches took place around this area where the car was found. I mean, it was mainly on land because there was quite a large wooded area just there. And then also a few days later, some divers searched the river. Nothing was really found, honestly. A week or two later, there was some human remains found, but they belonged to a male, and that was a dead end. But then as the investigation went on, some CCTV came out, and also phone data came out. And here's the timeline of the night of Heather's disappearance based on the CCTV and the phone records. This part you might have to drink some water, maybe stop slouching and perk your ears up a little bit, because it's gonna be one of those things where there's a lot of little details. But we got this. First things first, at 1:12 a.m, Sidney was caught on CCTV in a Walmart. He went in, he bought some cigars, and he bought a pregnancy test. At 1:35 a.m, this is when Heather received that call from the payphone. She answered and the call lasted 5 minutes. At the exact same time, Sidney was caught on CCTV going up to a payphone, calling somebody, and that call lasted 5 minutes. Then at 1:40 a.m, as soon as this call ended, Heather rings Bree. She said, "He left his wife, he wants to see me, and he wants to be with me." Next thing we know then is at 2:30 a.m, when a call from Heather's phone is made to that same payphone, but nobody answered. Call me thick, but I actually had no idea that you could literally call a payphone. I thought they could only have outgoing calls. Please let me know if I'm alone in that or not, but anyway. Soon after this, Heather's phone started pinging all over the place. So first things first, it was moved to Longbeard's bar, and it stayed there for 15 minutes. After this, the phone was taken to Augusta Plantation Drive, and then it was taken back to Longbeard's bar for another 15 minutes. So this would be at least 3 a.m. now. At 3:16 a.m, a call was made from Heather's phone to Sidney's phone, but nobody answered. And then at 3:17, another call was made from Heather's phone to Sidney's phone, but I believe someone did answer this time. Then Heather's phone seemed to be on the move again, and within 5 minutes it was back at Heather's apartment, but only for 5 minutes. Heather's phone then called Sidney's phone again, and this call was answered and it lasted 4 minutes. Now here's where things get interesting. More CCTV. So at 3:36 a.m, some CCTV caught a dark Ford F-150 driving towards Peachtree Landing. If you'll remember, Peachtree Landing is where Heather's car was found. And dark Ford F-150 sounds a bit like the car that Sidney and Tammy had just bought. And believe it or not, this car on the CCTV was later confirmed to be Sidney and Tammy's car. Oh my god! Alarm bells, alarm bells. By the way, this road that the car was driving down, the only thing at the end of that road is Peachtree Landing. Yes, there is a wooded area there as well. There are some houses as well. But other than that, it's a dead end. So it's not like some car was just driving through there to get to somewhere else. Then at 3:37 a.m, Heather's phone made it to Peachtree Landing. 1 minute later, 3 attempts were made from her phone to Sidney's phone within about 2 minutes, and none of them were answered. Then at 3:39 a.m, that same dark Ford F-150 was seen further down that road, still driving towards Peachtree Landing. At 3:41 a.m. then, Heather's phone made one last attempt to call Sidney. That is the end of Heather's phone records. So Big question mark around that period of time and the following 4 minutes, because at 3:45 and subsequently 3:46 a.m, the Ford F-150 was seen driving in the opposite direction, away from Peachtree Landing. Again, alarm bells. And what I found interesting was 2 days, or kind of 3 days, because she went missing in the middle of the night. On the 20th of December, basically, police stopped Sidney and they spoke to him and they asked him, when did you last hear from Heather Elvis? And he said, oh, last night or the night before. Well, it couldn't have been last night at that point because she was already missing. Maybe he was trying to play dumb. If it was the night before, that's the night that she went missing, okay? Suspicious. So, playing dumb or suspicious, I don't know, you tell me. Also, when they confronted him about making the call from the payphone, bearing in mind all he knew at this point was that Heather said Sidney called, Sidney totally denied it. And then when they told him that the call was made from a payphone, he said, do they still have payphones? But then not long after this, the CCTV footage came out of him walking up to a payphone at that exact moment, making a call that lasted the exact same amount of time, and walking away then. Still saying you never made that call, Sidney. Obviously at this point, he admitted to making the call, but he said that he only did it to tell her to leave him alone. Because according to Sidney, Heather was leaving notes on his car and she was calling him and texting him.
Enough's enough. Stop calling me. Stop texting me. She says, I don't know why it has to be like this or something like that. And I'm like, look, you just need to stop.
I can't dispute the notes on the car. I don't know. But I do know that there was no contact between Heather's phone and Sidney's phone since the start of November. And this is the 17th of December. Sidney and Tammy's phones, though, they also give us some details. They were pinging together at the same cell towers all night, and also at Peachtree Landing. Small world, eh? And the only form of communication between Sidney's phone and Tammy's phone that night was one text from Tammy to Sidney saying, the pot stickers and orange juice. And this was at 4:37 a.m. And he replied instantly with, yes ma'am. Now that might not seem that strange to you, but this text exchange took place in the middle of the night on the night of Heather's disappearance, just under an hour after Heather's phone record stopped. So what I'm thinking now is, does pot stickers and orange juice mean some kind of code for something? But what's more strange is they hadn't texted each other on their phones for about 6 weeks. Because if you'll remember, Tammy was the one in charge of Sidney's phone. So, you know, why would she text him? Because she had his phone. And then all of a sudden now, 6 weeks later, they have a text exchange? What was different about this night that maybe they needed to send a text to each other? Oh man, okay. Wait till you hear about the absolute that was being spouted online by Tammy and Sidney. Actually no, both of them. While all these allegations were coming out against them, Sidney and Tammy were adamant that Terry, Heather's father, was the one that was responsible for her disappearance. Right, so Tammy wrote a Facebook message to her friend, and it said, well, Sidney cheated on me in the months of September, October with a psycho, bad word, who has since went missing, and now her crazy daddy is threatening to kill my children and Sidney, therefore making Sidney stupid. This girl grabbed his business card out of the office at her workplace and had fantasies about him as far back as March, but talks about it in July, naming him. I don't know any other word to describe my husband at this point. All you have to do is research this girl's Twitter, although 4 months of it has gone missing in the last couple of weeks, and her Tumblr to see what a twisted person she truly is. I could care less seeing that I had a boyfriend of my own for the couple of years, but when someone brings my children into the scenario, it's a whole other story. I will not tolerate anyone hurting my children because my husband banged a hoe 3 times in the backseat of our car and nothing more. I could care less what he screwed around with, but the fact that this jerk is stalking my family is unacceptable. And she's talking about Terry, Heather's father, when she says this jerk. Sidney's Facebook then. Sidney wanted to make it very clear what Heather meant to him. Sidney said, Heather was just a girl that followed me at work and traded oral for pumpkin spice lattes. And Sidney then suggested that Terry Elvis was responsible for Heather's disappearance because Heather had told him that Terry abused her as a child. And by the way, those are allegations, those are not proven. Sidney also tried to push the narrative that the Ford F-150 was not his and that it was Terry's, and Sidney and Tammy made Heather out to be a stalker, when in actual fact, they were the ones that were stalking her. From the 2nd of November 2013, Sidney and Tammy's phones were following Heather's a significant amount of the time. Now, I'm sure you're probably wondering, like, do we trust Terry, Heather's dad? Like, is there anything that's questionable about him? Okay, he had quite a lengthy criminal history. I'm not going to go into it, but there was something that... I don't know, it was a little weird, but also... let me just tell you. So 2 months before Heather went missing, Terry posted on Facebook about how to get rid of a dead body. And he said, "Don't use concrete, use topsoil and sand mix. Cover with leaves or urine scraps. Concrete is a dead giveaway for where you buried them." Listen, it's kind of weird. But then, to be fair, if you were actually gonna do something, would that be something you would post online? Like, would you be that stupid? I don't know, maybe, but I mean, he could have easily just been interested in true crime. I don't know. Alright, moving on to the arrests and charges. So in February 2014, the police executed a search warrant on the Moorer residence, Sidney and Tammy's house. They searched thoroughly for 11 hours, but only 3 hours in, Sidney and Tammy were arrested. They were both charged with murder, kidnapping, obstruction of justice, and 2 counts each of indecent exposure. Little weird, that last one, right? So I'm sure you're wondering what that was about. Well, I'm gonna tell you. They allegedly had indecent photos of themselves on their phones, but these photos were taken in public places. Alright, so in early 2015 then, Sidney and Tammy were released from jail, having spent 11 months there. And this was after a judge accepted Tammy's mother's house as collateral for their $100,000 bond. And that was for the murder charges. And then the judge let them move to Florida because, you know, poor Sidney, he couldn't get a job because of all the bad press, what with the murder charges and whatnot. But anyway, they were monitored by GPS and it was fine, whatever. In March 2016 then, the murder charges were dropped and the kidnapping charges were put to pending. And there was a gag order imposed to all participants in this case. And I don't know if Sidney and Tammy were just like too stupid to realize when they were actually in violation of this, or maybe too narcissistic, who knows, but we'll get to that in a sec. Now, there have been a whole bunch of trials in this case, but I'm just going to focus in on 2 of them. But in the meantime, you do need to know some little details. First things first, we have June 2016, and this is when Sidney is tried on the kidnapping charge. After 7 hours of deliberation, there was a hung jury where 10 people wanted to convict and 2 didn't. Now, I believe one of those 2 was actually friends with somebody on the defense side, so maybe a little bit dodgy. Not sure how that happened, but that's what happened. But funnily enough, Sidney spoke... Ugh, this idiot. Sidney spoke to the media about the case. And after this, he was sentenced to 5 months in jail because he was in violation of the gag order. I mean, anyway, he was released after 2 months for good behaviour, but I just find that funny, haha. Moving on to the second trial then, Sidney was tried on the obstruction of justice charge, and this was all because of him lying about making the call on the payphone. After 3 days, Sidney was convicted of this charge. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, with credit for the 11 months that he had served just over a year prior. Alright, October 2018. Now this is where things start to get good, people. Right, buckle in, kids. we're going in. Tammy and Sidney were tried separately, so this was Tammy's case. It was her on trial for the kidnapping charge. So the prosecution introduced the threatening texts from Tammy to Heather. For example, someone's about to get their ass beat down. They were arguing that Tammy had found out about Heather's possible pregnancy and it threw her into a fit of rage and jealousy and shame and embarrassment all at once, which would only get worse if Sidney had a love child and a baby mama half her age floating around in the picture. Tammy's Facebook message was introduced where she called Heather a psycho. Oh, bad word. Which, by the way, reminds me a lot of Michael DeFrance in the last video I covered when he was speaking online about Jermaine Charlo after she went missing. Check that out if you haven't already. I'll have it linked up in the cards. Explicit texts were sent from Tammy to her lover, and these were shared in court along with some other texts where Tammy claimed that Sidney's affair didn't even bother her. It was like she got over that in a few days. It was just the fact that Heather was stalking their family. That's what bothered her. But then, even just taking a step back from that, like, couldn't that also be seen as a motive? Sidney's mother then testified that after learning about the affair, Tammy beat Sidney severely. Doesn't sound like she wasn't bothered to me, but... And when Tammy's sister Ashley testified, she said some pretty interesting stuff. She said that Tammy never handcuffed him to the bed, and that the night Heather disappeared, Ashley was actually watching Sidney and Tammy's kids until 3 a.m. And Tammy texted her at 3:10 a.m. saying that she and Sidney were home, so she could let the kids go home too. Now, Tammy decided to take the stand, which is a big move. This woman wanted to talk. I mean, she wanted to talk. To the point where she actually sat down with a reporter the night before she went on the stand and did an interview for the media, therefore violating the gag order. Let's just talk briefly about this interview. When talking about the allegations against her, Tammy said, "We're not those kind of people." She said, "I've never had a speeding ticket and I didn't even have sex till I was 18. She also denied being the dominant one in the relationship, although it was pretty clear to me that Tammy wore the pants. She also claimed that the tattoo Sidney got of her name above his crotch was Sidney's idea. What man in their right mind would want to get a tattoo of a woman's name above his hoo-ha? Especially if this man had an affair. Actually, what I haven't even said yet, the affair with Heather was his second affair. So if he has gone and had multiple affairs, why would he get a woman's name, I mean his wife's name, but still, tattooed there? Come on. Come on! And it was just interesting. I mean, the stories Tammy told in this interview made it seem like everybody else was lying and everybody else was manipulative. Interestingly though, the reporter actually pulled her up on that, and he said, "You know, it kind of seems like everyone else is lying, huh?" And she was like, "Exactly, that's why I'm so scared." I honestly have to say that if I was sat face to face with her, I actually think that it would be very difficult to dispute what she's saying. She is very convincing when she speaks, and that is next level worrying, because that's next level lying right there, if she's lying. Alright, now when Tammy took the stand, her overall demeanor was infuriating. She was smiling, she was being very charming. Some even described it as that was her performance. And while she was up there, she also argued against the handcuffing claim, because apparently, according to her, they had a sleigh bed, which meant that it wasn't even possible to handcuff someone to. I do wonder if that's been confirmed, because that's a pretty easy thing to confirm. She did admit to being initially angry about the affair, but that she got over it in a few days. But I don't think you're going from that anger level to it's all good in like a matter of days. Come on. Listen, lady, I don't believe you. I mean, sure, it would help your case, but I don't know. And she said that the night Heather disappeared, she and Sidney were out because they wanted to go have some fun. Sorry, that was so creepy. in Sidney's truck, and they wanted to buy the pregnancy test because they were trying for another baby. Why? Why? Why would you want to bring another child into the world when you've had such a rocky year? Allegedly, they were also trying for a baby because Tammy had miscarried in jail, and I do believe that that miscarriage actually did happen. Anyway, back to Tammy on the stand. She actually gave her own timeline for that night, and that went as follows. At 1:47 a.m, her sister texts her. At 3:10 a.m, Tammy gets home. At 3:58 a.m, there were conversations between Tammy and Sidney. I mean, that just doesn't cut it for me. She was on her phone nearly half an hour before their car went to Peachtree Landing, and about 15 minutes after. She didn't have any documentation for the time period that actually mattered here. Right around 3:41 a.m. when Heather's phone record stopped. At one point, Tammy called the prosecutor, whose name was Nancy Livesay, by her first name. She called her Nancy, and this prosecutor was a beast. She just said to her, "Have we met outside this courtroom?" And Tammy said, "No." And Nancy said, "I just don't know when we got on a first name basis." She just knew instantly that Tammy was trying to bring her down from her role of authority right down to her level. Tammy then, while still on the stand, spoke about a nice conversation she had had with Heather, where they had allegedly reconciled their differences, and she said something quite interesting actually. She said Heather was a nice girl. That's another thing that Nancy Livesay went straight in on. She was like, "Do you know something we don't know?" And I will just remind you at this point, Tammy was on trial for kidnapping, not for murder, because the murder charges had been dropped. But I'm just going to come out and say it. I think Tammy did something, and I don't think she regrets it. You can disagree with me all you want, but I just have a really strong feeling about that woman. Regardless, the jury probably felt the same as I do, because after the 11-day trial, they went into deliberations for 4 hours and they found Tammy guilty. Guilty of conspiracy to kidnap. And Tammy was then sentenced to 30 years in prison. Alright, so moving on to Sidney's retrial, because remember, when he was originally tried for the kidnapping charges, there was a hung jury. This took place in September 2019, and actually there was more evidence that had been brought forward, which is fantastic. On the 20th of December, 2 to 3 days after Heather went missing, they tore out their surveillance cameras in their house, and they put a new surveillance system in on the 21st. On the 22nd of December, there was CCTV footage from their own cameras of them cleaning their car, their Ford F-150, for hours. And they were focusing a lot on the rear passenger side. And about 30 minutes into cleaning it, Sidney started a burn pile and started burning the cloths that they were cleaning the car with. And this continues the whole time, for hours. Why would you do this if you weren't hiding something huge? Like, I've never felt the need to burn cloths I'm cleaning with. Then there was also Donald DiMarino, and this is Tammy's cousin, who Sidney had showed a very telling picture to. It was a picture of Heather, clearly after she went missing, clearly no longer alive, and she had scratches on her face and blood on her shirt. But the defense went in hard on him and his credibility because, yes, he was an addict, and yes, he had been a previously convicted criminal. But why would he go against his family? Especially for no reason. Also, Sidney and Tammy disengaged the GPS system in their Ford F-150. There's this thing like a memory card that you can take out, and when you do, it just, like, the GPS is totally off. When you do this though, the whole car comes up with warning signs. So this couldn't have been a mistake. So you don't just accidentally do this and then not realize. And then there was some more interesting evidence that was brought up, and that was some CCTV footage of Tammy and her sister Ashley at the Mora residence, where the two sisters were clearly looking for police bugs. Ashley herself was questioned about this on the stand, and she didn't recall. And she was trying to say that Tammy looked like she was gardening or something, but Tammy was literally going around looking underneath garden furniture with a mirror. Why else would you do that? I mean, if there is a genuine reason why you do that, please comment it. Regardless, in the end of Sidney's trial, they found him guilty of kidnapping and of obstruction of justice. Again, he was sentenced to 30 years on both charges. Alright, now I am going to get into theories, because even though there are two very suspicious and guilty looking people in prison, the case is still technically unsolved. We don't know where Heather is, and nobody has actually been found guilty of murder. So first things first, I'm gonna talk about a runaway theory. I feel like it kind of has to be considered in any missing person case, but I'm not gonna spend much time on it in this case. For this theory, Heather was very stressed out about the whole Sidney situation. She was afraid of Tammy. She was very paranoid. And she had actually tweeted a little bit about how she would love to just leave the small town, and she even tweeted the price of a ticket to Thailand. And with that she said, "Watch me book my flight." But I'm gonna be honest, I've definitely tweeted things like that before with no intention of leaving. And also, let's be honest, she was excited about her new job. She also seemed to really enjoy the date with Stephen Giraldi, and she was in a really good place at that time. And she and Brie were getting on great. They were going to church and everything. She seemed to be really getting her life together. So if you were gonna leave, why not leave in late October, early November, when Tammy found out and was threatening you? Why wait till December when things are actually getting better and you've got your life together? Moving on to the next theory, which is Stephen Giraldi. Look, he was the last person to see her, technically. He went on a first date with her on the night she disappeared. Another thing though about him was that he changed the seats in his car only a few days after Heather went missing. So that is maybe a little suspicious, but then you could also maybe argue that he was afraid that it was going to be pinned on him because he went on a date with her on the night she disappeared. It's a difficult situation to comment on, to be honest. But Stephen was cleared very soon into the investigation. He was totally cooperative. And honestly, I think he was just unlucky that he literally went on a first date with a girl and just a few hours later she went missing. Alright, the next theory is Terry Elvis, that Heather's dad had something to do with it. Obviously, there were the allegations of abuse. There was the freaky dead body post, and that was pretty weird. Apparently he had a lengthy criminal history, but that was all back in the 80s, and he really seemed to become quite the family man since then. But you could also argue that the fact that Terry got into her car and drove it home when technically it was still a crime scene, only they didn't really realize it was a crime scene at this point, that if he was guilty, that could have been an attempt to just like totally mess up the crime scene. But seeing the interviews he did, this man was heartbroken. He was missing his daughter. He couldn't even contain himself when he was begging for her to come back. And it felt real, honestly.
If Heather happens to be watching this, I want you to reach out, or is there anything you want to say? I know we asked you this earlier, but is there anything you want to say if she happens to be watching right now?
Heather, if you're watching this, if you can see it, if you can hear it, we miss you. We want you home. Tell me where you're at. I'll come. Doesn't matter where. Doesn't matter when. Doesn't matter why. Just tell us where you're at.
Last but not least, we have Sidney and Tammy. Where do I even start with these two? Tammy actually said in a message or a comment on Facebook that Sidney had told her that Heather had told him that she was pregnant. And if they believed she was pregnant, whether or not she was, who knows what they could have done to her. That would have been eternal embarrassment for their whole family. But let's see, evidence against them. We've got their car driving towards Peachtree Landing only minutes before Heather's phone activity ended, and their car driving back from there just minutes after Heather's phone activity ended. We have the fact that Sidney made that call from the payphone that night. He made a call to Heather. We have Sidney buying that pregnancy test in the Walmart about an hour beforehand. How about the fact that they literally burned the cloths that they were cleaning their car with? And this next bit isn't evidence, but Tammy's rage. That's a whole thing in itself. It seems to me like they lured Heather there with the promise that Sidney had left Tammy, and maybe when they got there they forced her to take a pregnancy test, and if the answer on that test was not what they wanted it to be, who knows where that could have gone. But where did they bring her after that? I suppose if we knew that it probably wouldn't be an unsolved case. But that area around Myrtle Beach, there is a lot of swampland, there is a lot of wooded area. It is probably, unfortunately, a very easy place to get rid of a body. Also, even though Sidney and Tammy are both very, very suspicious, which of them pulled the trigger? Figuratively, or literally, really. If it was Sidney, I mean, yes, he was the romantic partner involved. Maybe he wanted her out of the picture. Maybe he didn't want a baby with a 20-year-old girl. Makes sense. If it was Tammy, I mean, we already know how angry and jealous she already was. And earlier in the year, Heather had actually changed her relationship status on Facebook to in a relationship, and that was during the affair. And if she also thought she was pregnant, that's an even greater motive. So she definitely has motive. And just seeing how manipulative she is when she speaks at all, when she took the stand, this whole thing just doesn't feel real. I mean, look at me, like, I started my true crime YouTube channel about 1.5 years ago, and there are still things that I just can't believe that this actually happens in the real world. But listen, Heather's family still don't know what happened. Heather is still considered a missing person, and they have to live every single day not knowing, and not knowing if they will ever know. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please drop a like, drop a comment. As a small channel, that helps me out a lot. And if there are any missing person cases specifically that you would like to see me cover, please put it into the case suggestion form I have linked in the description of this video. You can go ahead and follow me on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter at katephilpott_YT. And other than that, thank you for being here, and I will see you next time. Bye guys.